Hello and welcome to Patristica. Today, just on my own, as sometimes happens, because I'd like to share with you a talk which I'm going to give to the Max Weber colleague in Erfurt just in a few days. And it also summarizes two twin projects which I've worked on over the past years. And yeah, just listen in. The title is Max Weber and Historiography. Intellectually, I would not be in the place and space where I'm right now if I had not been exposed in the Max Weber colleague to the reinterpretations of Max Weber. The most recent research outputs focus on his concept of the prophetic and charismatic personality who, quote, behaves revolutionarily, revaluing everything and independently breaking with every traditional and rational norm. So, Max Weber. This quote is taken from his Grundriss der Sozialökonomik, so the foundation of social economy, and I quote this text in a forthcoming monograph that is entitled Early Christianity and the Challenge of Writing History, to be published by Cambridge University Press next year in 2025. In this book, I'm suggesting, quote, that historiography can be revolutionary, can revalue everything and independently break with every traditional and rational norm only if the historian exposes herself or himself to that very radical criticism by being as transparent, open, honest, straightforward, personal, and individual as possible, while at the same time admitting that she or he is what she or he is, being one node in a network of colleagues. This I call an autobiographical historiography, which builds on and is a consequence of writing history in a retrospective mode. In commenting on Weber's quoted statement, I continue in the mentioned forthcoming book, quote, the opposite character is represented by the credo of historicism that Walter Benjamin, finds mainly in three historians, two of whom were his contemporaries. The one a bit older, Louis Dimier, who died in 1943, the other being Henri Fauquillon, who died as well in 1943, both who Benjamin relates to the famous 19th century Numa Denis Fustel de Coulanges, who died already in 1889. Dimier was a political historian, but a royalist who despised the French Revolution. Fauquillon, the art historian with great influence in France and the United States, stood for the praise of nature as the master of arts. De Coulanges marked the beginnings of a gross positivistic historiography, which Benjamin criticized as being both a statement of faith, bogus, and a blotting out everything he knows about the later course of history. Benjamin's judgment, I quote, there is no better way of characterizing the method which historical materialism has broken with. Answering these people, Benjamin admits that, quote, history has to do with causal connections and with deliberately fantasized causal chains. But by providing a concept of the principal possibility to cite history, this concept in its sharpest form must offer itself as a moment of humanity. Time must be arrested in it. Benjamin does not deny here causal connections and continuities in history, but makes the reader aware of the potentially purposefully, misleadingly, and viciously dreamt up causalities that must be seen as human-made. Once that is admitted, history focuses on the historian in the very now, the moment, as he says, of humanity, in which time stops, where there's nothing but the present for everybody, where even all human past, or present and future, come together in one single act, nothing that nature or even time does by itself. Neither natural impetus nor any ticking clock has suddenly stopped or run its time, but time has been put on hold by action and the activity of the historian. Benjamin adds the comparison that this moment is like, quote, a ball lightning that runs over the entire horizon of what is past. Writing history, he understands as seeing in the past, quote, what culminates in the constellation of this one and same moment, end of quote. Causal connections are not given, but interpretive ones, retro-projected posthumously by historians whose, I quote, era is being put into constellation with an earlier area, quote end. At the same time, the present is the historian's now, something Benjamin calls with Leibniz the monad. And he continues, quote, historic knowledge is possible solely and only in the historic moment. Knowing within the historic moment is, however, always a form of knowledge of the one moment, by retracting itself into the one moment, to the dialectical image. The past moves into the involuntary memory of humanity. End of quote. It is not only the historian looking out from the very now, the specific circumstances, social, political, and cultural context from which one scrutinizes the past, catching and abstracting it with its various and deliberately chosen causal connections. It is, for Benjamin, the past itself that is being condensed into this very same moment, which together as one moment enters one's memory. Not the memory of one specific historian, but that of all human beings. Here, Benjamin draws on Karl Jochmann's, who died in 1830, theory of memory, by which he, quote, believed that memory's power to connect past and present can renew the imagination's animating role, so that if history in modern times has come to be conceived as a story moving in a linear direction, Jochmann explained, memory may be understood to tap the wellsprings of the imagined past in cycles of forgetting and remembering, and so makes possible traditions renewal. So far, Benjamin. Based on this theory of memory, Benjamin, as he himself admits, endorses an exceptional kind of universal history, an alternative to positivist historicism, as we have seen before. It's certainly due to the specific constellation of his moment in time and his indebtedness to Hegel that he considers it bound to progress and culture. Yet for this type of universal history not to be reactionary, Benjamin suggests it to be principally constructivist. By this, he rejects a homogeneous total history of a temporal continuum, against which he holds, as he says, partial histories, which I equate with history as a discontinuous concept of individual stories. And as shown in cognitive historiography, it is a rewriting of the past in each memorization of it. Our brain, according to latest research, does not store entire experiences, but only fragments of these. And when called upon by memory, the brain reconstitutes and recreates, constructs what belief we remember in an instantiation in a now. Hence, partial is history, also because history, in this discontinuous sense, highlights all the possibilities and possible outcomes that were missed. This idea links to constructivist multiculturalism, when Benjamin relates the multiplicity of histories with, as he says, the multiplicity of languages. It expresses the hope of the human race no more effectively than the name Esperanto of that universal language, his quote. Just as this international language was the product of a scholarly creation, going back to Ludwig Zamenhof, he died in 1917, and who under the pseudonymous of Dr. Esperanto, which means one who hopes, published an expository textbook in Russian in 1887. Universal history is nothing that comes naturally about, but needs the active agent that gives form and structure, just as bricks are handmade. Moreover, the artificial construct is far from what a perfected universal language in an ideal scenario should be, as it is already less consistent or harmonious than the lingua franca of Latin in the Middle Ages, or the formal one of the logicians like that of Leibniz. With Benjamin concentrating the work of the historian to the very present, genuine historiography has to overcome the problem that within the present, which does not allow for reflection and self-distinction, we're too close to each other. The present can be critically judged or even foreseen. While presential judgments are generally too late, without the historian's gaze because of the impossibility of hindsight, only his historical reflection allows for the provision of the critical vision. It is less the present that moves into the past, but rather the past that is present in the present, that enables our critical view of the present. So far, these passages of the forthcoming book, which are taken from chapter 4, The Timeless Times of History. Let me move back to the opening of the book, which clarifies, hopefully, even more the character of the suggested autobiographical historiography, which, for the peer reviewers of this manuscript, was enticing, but also seen as bordering on an imposition. The opening of the forthcoming book's preface to early Christianity and the challenge of writing history runs as follows. There are more significant challenges than the writing of early Christian history, though trying to figure out how to write this history when dealing with early Christianity implies specific hurdles. As suggested in this book, the challenge does not come with the sparsity of evidence, a natural problem with most history writing of late antiquity or antique subject matters. It comes rather with ideological tendencies or religious or anti-religious inclinations. This said, the writer of this history is the prime obstacle, not the topic they're writing about. Hence, the first challenge is critical self-confrontation. With this, I start. The book would not have been written if my late wife, Jutta, had not invited me on a journey to Croatia 3 years ago. Instead of spending the late spring and early summer months in the rainy UK or Germany, we decided to leave for the sun on the Mediterranean Sea, booked us into various small places to spend all day writing and having a stroll in the evening to discuss with one another what we had done during the day. These are memorable days. We did not know that these would be the last summer days that we were able to spend together, although we had seen the writing on the wall for over 10 years since her first diagnosis of ovarian cancer. Looking back at these sunny days, after the shock at the end of the journey, aware and knowing that there will be no more such days to come, suddenly the topic of the present book, writing history in an autobiographical and retrospective mode, had been given another radical, bitter and sad, but also sweet and thankful dimension. It has turned an already very personal book into a special memory of these rich moments and the experience of absence, far from being purely that of a loss. It is, however, the latter that even provokes and cherishes the former. The book, therefore, is dedicated to her, Jutta, as so many ideas and questions were hers, and numerous subsequent answers have been co-developed. A little later in the book, I mention one of the reviewers of my earlier 2019 COP book on writing the history of early Christianity from reception to retrospection, Laura Carnevale from Bari University, because she pushed me from retrospection to autobiography. I quote in this forthcoming manuscript, "Rather implicitly, Laura Carnevale points to autobiography as an additional feature of retrospection, a sort of implication, namely the personal exposure of the historian in the writing of history. Honesty, courage, the willingness to engage the attention of other scholars, and the readiness to be criticized. To be not simply a historian, but a human being who faces doubts and uncertainties in his life and work." So far her quote. In reflecting on her suggestion, I add in the new book, I quote, "Though we have fictional literature where autobiographical elements play a significant role, historians usually refrain from connecting their research with their biographies, unless they write about themselves when, for example, producing an autobiography." Virginia Woolf, in her book The Art of Biography, sets biography apart from poetry and fiction, as it is, quote, "made with the help of friends of facts," while poetry and fiction are created without any restrictions, save those that the artist, for reasons that seem God to him, chooses to obey. End of quote. If so, biography would come close to the writing of history, even though the biographical genre is often neglected or seen as of lesser importance to historians. And yet, in my earlier 2019 book, The Writing, I already emphasized the historian's point of view, his position, the place and time of writing, and the impact of personal and cultural upbringing on writing history. Writing history does not only come close to biography in the sense of Woolf. The boundaries, I think, between historiography, biography, poetry, and fiction are more blurred than Woolf's distinction would allow, even if these genres should not simply be equated. Even less explored than the relation between historiography and biography is the writing of history as biography, or even more daring, as autobiography, on which, at best, modern historians touch, engaging their memory and reflecting on themselves as witnesses of what they will explore. A case in point is Eric Hobsbawm, known for his history of the 20th century, titled The Age of Extremes. He has also written an autobiography covering the same period, named Interesting Times, A 20th Century Life. In the latter, he's taking his autobiography as the flip side of his other book, quote, "not world history illustrated by the experiences of an individual, but world history shaping that experience." End of quote. According to Hobsbawm, the agency has shifted from the author to his context, even when writing his autobiography. In contrast, I would like to follow Laura Carnevale's observation that retrospection strengthens the agency of the author, not only in writing history, but also in writing autobiographical history, so that we are faced with the co-creative processes of authors and their contexts and objects. In doing so, the present volume further details and develops what I presented as initial ideas on retrospection in this earlier book, The Writing, linking it with autobiographical elements and referencing relevant debates on early Christianity, in which I had been and in which I'm still involved, as you know from this channel. So far, these are snippets from the new manuscripts. But however, in a twin project, in tandem of writing this book with meta-reflection of historiography, I wrote an autobiographical piece of fiction that builds on the same time since Jutta and me arrived at the Max Weber Colleague and goes further back in our histories. It is a novel, an autobiographical, fictive novel, the title of which is, at the moment, working title for England is Letting Go. The German title is Nicht alle Tage, which is a shortened title of a poem, a late poem by Friedrich Hölderlin, This novel will appear in 2 volumes published by der Verlag der Blaue Reiter, known for its journal Der Philosophie, and of course for having published my colleague's novel on Margaret Porreid, Dietmar Meets Ketzerflammen in Paris. Autobiographical fiction, poetry, and autobiographical historiography are the projects where I'm involved in most at the moment, next to the reconstruction of Paul, Marcion, and other topics. You will also see Meister Eckhart is being part of the new manuscript, because these are the topics which concern me. Thank you very much for listening into this talk, which I'm going to give to the Max Weber colleague, and I hope gives a small insight into what concerns me and what you can expect in the nearer future as a published output. Thank you so much, and don't forget, subscribe to this channel of Patristica, and also, if you like, have a look into the opening of the novel, which I'm reading in English, here also on YouTube. Thank you so much.